The day had started off well enough, with Diana buzzing around the house, setting up for her children's game night. She had just placed the last bowl of popcorn on the coffee table when the doorbell rang. Thinking it might be one of the neighborhood kids arriving early, she wiped her hands on her jeans and headed for the door with a smile. Upon opening the door, Diana was met not by a familiar face, but by a strikingly elegant woman she'd never seen before. The woman's sharp green eyes assessed Diana coolly from head to toe. "Can I help you?" Diana asked, her smile faltering under the woman's intense gaze. The woman straightened her designer jacket before speaking. "You must be Diana." "I'm Brittany. I suppose you could say I'm the new lady of the house." Diana blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Brittany stepped forward, a rehearsed confidence in her posture. "I'm Roy's fiancée, and I'm here to take a look at the house. We're going to need it back." Diana felt her heart sink into her stomach. "Back? This is my home. My children's home. What are you talking about?" Brittany's lips curled into a condescending smile. "Well, it seems Roy hasn't kept you in the loop. The house was always meant to be a temporary arrangement for you. Post-divorce niceties, you know. But now that we're getting married, we'll be needing it." "You can't be serious," Diana stammered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. "Oh, but I am," Brittany replied smoothly. "You have 1 month to find somewhere else to live. I suggest you start packing." The words hit Diana like a physical blow. She steadied herself against the doorframe, trying to process the nightmare unfolding on her doorstep. "This is a mistake. I'm going to call Roy. He would never do this," Diana said, more to herself than to Brittany. "Suit yourself," Brittany said, stepping back. "But it won't change a thing. You'll hear from our lawyer soon." With that, Brittany turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Diana staring after her in a daze. As soon as Brittany was out of sight, Diana fumbled for her phone and dialed Roy's number. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again, her fingers shaking, but got the same result. Diana slumped against the door, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not to her children, not without a fight. She needed to think, to plan, to fight. But first, she needed to know if what Brittany said was really true. And there was only one person who could tell her. The game night forgotten, Diana closed the door and braced herself for what might be the toughest battle of her life. After the unsettling visit from Brittany, Diana's mind was in turmoil. She paced back and forth in the kitchen, clutching her phone, desperately trying to reach Roy. She dialed his number repeatedly, each call ringing out to the hollow sound of the voicemail tone. With each attempt, her frustration and anxiety grew. Finally, the phone clicked, and she heard Roy's voice on the other end. "Diana? What's going on? Why are you calling so much?" "Roy, you need to tell me what's happening. Some woman just showed up at my door saying she's your fiancée and that she's taking the house. She said we have to move out. Please, tell me that's not true." Diana's voice was shaky but insistent. There was a pause, and when Roy spoke, his voice was cold and distant. "Brittany, yes, we're engaged. I was going to tell you." Diana's heart raced. "But the house?" She said, "We have to leave. That can't be right, Roy." "It's true, Diana. The house is in my name, and I want it back. You'll need to start looking for another place." Roy's tone was flat, almost robotic. "You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? What about the kids?" Diana's voice rose in pitch, her desperation clear. "Look, Diana, it's not my problem. You'll figure something out." "You always do," Roy replied, his voice hard. Diana pressed the phone tighter against her ear. "And what about the kids, Roy? You're just going to pull them out of their home? How could you do this?" Roy's patience seemed to be wearing thin. "I'm doing what's best for me right now. I suggest you do the same." Diana's voice cracked as she tried to reason with him. "Roy, please, think about what you're doing. This isn't right. This isn't you." "There's nothing more to discuss, Diana. I'm at work, and I can't do this now without waiting for a response." Roy ended the call. The line went dead. leaving Diana staring at her phone in disbelief. The room spun around her as the reality of the situation sank in. Her hands trembled, and she felt a tear roll down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. Crying wouldn't help. She needed to be strong, for her children. With Roy's dismissal echoing in her mind, Diana knew she had to act. She couldn't let this happen. She had to fight back, but first she needed allies, and she knew just the person to call. Gathering her resolve, Diana dialed Laurie's number, Roy's sister and her former sister-in-law, who had always been kind to her. If anyone would understand and help, it would be Laurie. As the phone rang, Diana hoped for a friendly voice to help guide her through the storm that was brewing. The phone rang twice before Laurie picked up. Diana heard the familiar warmth in her voice, a contrast to the cold dismissal she'd just endured from Roy. "Diana? Is everything okay? You sound upset." Laurie's voice was tinged with concern. Diana took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Laurie, I don't even know how to say this. Brittany came to the house today. She told me she's Roy's fiancée and that they want the house back. She said we have to move out in a month." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Brittany? The house? Oh, Diana, I'm so sorry. I had no idea things had gotten this far. Roy has changed a lot lately, but this..." "I tried calling Roy, and he just dismissed everything. He told me it was true and hung up. Laurie, I don't know what to do. This is our home." The kid's Diana's voice cracked with emotion. Laurie's voice hardened with resolve. "Don't worry, Diana. We're not going to let him do this to you and the kids. He's my brother and I love him, but he's wrong. I'll talk to him. And you know, Mum will never stand for this either. Let me talk to her and then get back to you. We'll figure this out together." Diana felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Laurie. I knew I could count on you. I'm just so lost right now." "Hang in there, Diana. Brittany has somehow gotten into Roy's head, but we're family. We stick together. I'll call you back as soon as I've spoken to Mum. We'll come up with a plan," Laurie reassured her. After hanging up, Diana felt a bit more grounded. Laurie's support was a lifeline in the chaos. She knew the battle ahead would be tough, but with Laurie and possibly Missis Helen on her side, there was a glimmer of hope. Laurie, true to her word, wasted no time. She called their mother, Missis Helen, who was equally shocked and furious at the news. Both women agreed that they needed to confront Roy together and support Diana in any way possible. "Diana, Mum and I are on your side. We're going to meet with Roy this weekend and talk some sense into him. He can't just throw his family out on the street, and you, your family, Diana, no matter what's happened between you and Roy," Laurie said when she called Diana back later that evening. "Thank you, Laurie. I can't tell you what this means to me." "To us," Diana responded, feeling a mix of gratitude and anxiety about the upcoming confrontation. As Diana ended the call, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was uncertain, but she wasn't alone. With Laurie and Missis Helen ready to stand by her, Diana knew she had powerful allies in her corner. This fight was just beginning, and she was ready to stand her ground for her children's future. Diana spent the next few days in a haze of activity, rallying support and gathering evidence. She knew the confrontation with Roy was inevitable and wanted to be as prepared as possible. Her first step was to gather all the financial documents and records of the house she could find. As she rifled through folders and files, her friend Karen dropped by. "What are you looking for?" D.I. Karen asked, noticing the scattered papers around the living room. "Anything that proves this house isn't just Roy's to take away. I can't believe he'd do this to the kids," Diana responded, her voice tight with frustration. Karen sat down beside her, a supportive hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, you know. The whole neighborhood is talking. Everyone's shocked by what Roy's doing. If you need anything, testimonies, character references, just say the word." Diana looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thanks, Karen. It means a lot. Right now, I just need to find evidence that this house was meant to be for me and the kids, no matter what Roy's fiancée says." As they continued to sort through documents, Diana's phone buzzed. It was a text from Laurie meeting set for Saturday at the Old Oak. Mum, you and me. We talked to Roy face to face. Diana showed Karen the message, trying to steady her nerves. It's happening. Laurie and Missis Helen are meeting us and Roy to sort this out. You've got strong women on your side, Diana. Roy's going to have a tough time arguing with all of you together, Karen remarked, trying to bolster her friend's spirits. Later that day, Diana took a walk to clear her head. As she passed through the neighborhood, several neighbors stopped her, offering words of support and sharing their own disbelief at Roy's actions. Diana, if there's anything we can do to help, let us know. It's just not right. What's happening, mister? Thompson, the elderly man from next door, said as he trimmed his hedges. Thank you, mister. Thompson, just knowing the neighborhood supports us makes a big difference, Diana replied, touched by the solidarity. By the time Saturday rolled around, Diana felt a mix of nervous anticipation and resolve. She met Laurie and Missis Helen at the Old Oak, a quiet cafe where they could talk privately. Missis Helen was visibly upset but composed, her determination clear. We'll set things right, Diana. Roy may be my son, but I won't let him do this to his children. Not while I have anything to say about it, Missis Helen stated firmly as they sat down. Laurie nodded in agreement, her brow furrowed. I've never seen him like this before. Brittany has changed him, and not for the better. But we're not going to let her break this family apart. Diana took a deep breath, bolstered by their support. Thank you both so much. It's going to be hard to face him, but I'm ready. I have to be for the kids. The three women reviewed their plan one last time before heading to the restaurant where the confrontation with Roy would take place. Each knew the stakes were high and the upcoming battle would be decisive. Diana felt a storm brewing, but with Laurie and Missis Helen by her side, she was ready to face it head-on. The air was tense as Diana, Laurie and Missis Helen entered the restaurant. The clink of cutlery and low hum of conversation did little to mask the anxiety they felt. Roy and Brittany were already there, seated at a corner table that afforded a clear view of the entire place. Brittany, spotting them first, nudged Roy and whispered something in his ear. As the trio approached, Roy's expression hardened. Mum, Laurie, Diana, this isn't necessary. We could have handled this privately. Missis Helen took the lead, her voice steady but filled with emotion. This is as private as it gets, Roy. We're here because we care about you and those kids. What you're doing isn't right. Brittany interjected with a forced smile. Helen, I understand you're upset, but this is between Diana and Roy. There's no need to make a scene. Diana felt her stomach churn but found her voice. A scene? Brittany? You came to my home and told me I had to leave, without any notice. If that's not making a scene, I don't know what is. Roy sighed, looking between the women. Let's just settle this. What do you want, Diana? Laurie, who had been silent until now, spoke up. We want you to see reason, Roy. You can't just kick Diana and the kids out of their home. It's cruel, and you know it. Roy rubbed his temples. It's my house. I can do what I want with it. Missis Helen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper but sharp as a knife. Your house. Who do you think you are? That house was for your children, your family. Not for you to leverage against your ex-wife for. For her. Roy's gaze flickered, but before he could reply, Missis Helen continued, We have the financial statements, Roy. We know there's more to your finances than you've let on. Brittany's eyes widened. What are you implying? Diana took a deep breath, her hands trembling but her voice strong. I'm implying that there's been a lot of dishonesty. And it's hurting your children, Roy. How can you stand by and watch that happen? There was a pause, the weight of Diana's words hanging in the air. Roy looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Brittany leaned in, her tone condescending. Diana, let's be reasonable. The house is big. It's just you and the kids. Surely you can find somewhere smaller, more suitable. Missis Helen scoffed. That's not your decision to make, young lady. It's not about the size of the house. It's about those children's home. Their stability. Roy finally spoke, his voice low. I don't want to argue anymore. What do you want me to do? Diana replied, I want you to think about your children, not just about what you or Brittany want. This is their home, Roy. You grew up knowing you always had a home. Why would you deny them that? The conversation stalled as the server approached to take their order, giving them a momentary break from the heavy discussion. As the server left, the tension resumed, each person bracing for Roy's response. Missis Helen, seizing the opportunity, laid out their terms. We want you to reconsider your decision. We're prepared to fight for Diana and the children's rights. And trust me, you don't want this to get legal. Roy massaged the bridge of his nose, looking between the determined faces of his family. I need to think about this. I didn't realize it would go this far. Diana's heart pounded as she watched Roy struggle with his decision. This confrontation was the culmination of days of stress and fear, but she knew standing up for her children's future was worth every difficult moment. As they waited for Roy's answer, the future of their family hung precariously in the balance. The silence that hung over the table after Diana's plea was palpable. Roy's eyes darted between the determined faces of his family, and he seemed to shrink under the weight of their stares. Missis Helen broke the silence. Her tone was as firm as it was cold. Roy, we've been over your financials. We know there's more you haven't disclosed. This isn't just about a house, it's about your integrity, your children. Roy looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Mum, what do you want from me? Simple Missis Helen leaned in, her voice steady. Reconsider your decision. Keep the family home for Diana and the kids. And we need more than just your word, we need it in writing. Brittany interjected, her voice sharp. Roy, you don't have to listen to this. They can't force you. Laurie cut her off. Actually, Brittany, we can. And we will if we have to. This isn't just a squabble. It's about what's right. Roy, think about your children. Roy rubbed his forehead, clearly agitated. This is insane. You're asking me to just give up. Diana, who had been quietly listening, spoke up, her voice clear and firm. Not give up, Roy. Think of it as doing what's right by your children. Isn't that worth more than anything? Roy sighed deeply, his face a mask of conflict. I need some time to think. Missis Helen, sensing the need to push harder, added, you have until tomorrow. We're prepared to take this further if we have to. Legal avenues are open, and we will use them. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Brittany, who had been silent, spoke up, her voice laced with frustration. Roy, they're bluffing. They can't. Missis Helen turned to Brittany, her gaze sharp as a knife. This isn't a bluff, and I suggest you stay out of this. This is family, and last I checked, you aren't family yet. Roy, looking more defeated than angry, nodded slowly. Okay, I'll think about it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. Diana reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it over Roy's. Please think about what's best for the kids. They love that house. They love you. Don't take their home away. As the group disbanded, the air was thick with unsaid words and tension. Diana, Laurie and Missis Helen walked out together, their steps heavy but unified. Outside the restaurant, Laurie hugged Diana tightly. We'll get through this, Diana. One way or another. Missis Helen nodded, her expression resolute. He'll do the right thing. He has to. As they went their separate ways, Diana felt a mix of hope and dread. The ultimatum was set, and now it was up to Roy to make his decision. She knew the next 24 hours would be crucial, not just for her and the children, but for the entire family. The storm was not over yet, but Diana felt stronger with her allies by her side, ready to face whatever came next. The night was restless for Diana. Each tick of the clock echoed in her mind as she lay awake, pondering the consequences of the ultimatum they had laid before Roy. The morning sun brought no relief, only the heavy weight of the impending decision. Roy had asked to meet at the same restaurant, a neutral ground where yesterday's confrontation had unfolded. As Diana arrived with Laurie and Missis Helen, she noticed Roy sitting alone. This time Brittany was conspicuously absent. Missis Helen was the first to speak as they sat down. Well, Roy, have you thought it over? Roy looked up, his eyes weary. I have, Mum. It's not been easy. Brittany, she sees things differently. But this isn't about her. This is about my kids and what's best for them. Diana held her breath, waiting for more. I can't take their home away. It wouldn't be right. It's where they've grown up, where they feel safe. I see that now, Roy continued, his voice more confident as he spoke. Diana felt a wave of relief but kept her composure. So what are you saying, Roy? I'm saying the house stays with Diana and the kids. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers. I'll keep ownership, but Diana, you'll have lifetime rights to live there, as will the kids, until they decide otherwise, Roy explained, looking directly at Diana for the first time since they sat down. Missis Helen nodded, a tight smile on her face. That's a good decision, Roy. It's the right one. Laurie, who had been silently watching her brother, added, Thank you, Roy. It means a lot, not just to Diana, but to Mum and me too. Family is family. Roy nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands folded on the table. I'm sorry for all this. I got caught up in, I don't know what, but I see things clearer now. Diana, moved by Roy's words, reached out across the table, her hand slightly trembling as she offered it to him. Thank you, Roy, for choosing your children, for choosing what's right. Roy took her hand, a mutual understanding passing between them. I hope we can move past this. For the kids. As they stood to leave, Mrs. Helen paused by Roy, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. You did good, son. Let's try to put this behind us and look forward. Outside the restaurant, the air felt lighter, the burden of the past days lifting slightly. Diana, Laurie and Mrs. Helen shared a quiet moment of triumph. We did it, Diana said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. We did, Laurie echoed, squeezing Diana's shoulder. Mrs. Helen looked at both women, pride evident in her eyes. We stand up for each other. That's what family does. And remember, Diana, you're as much a part of this family as any of us. As they parted ways, Diana felt not just the victory of the moment but the reassurance of regained family support. Roy's decision had not just preserved a home for her children, it had begun to mend fractured bonds, offering a glimpse of hope for a new start. The warmth of the afternoon sun matched Diana's mood as she walked towards her car, a soft smile playing on her lips. She felt lighter than she had in days, maybe weeks. As she slid into the driver's seat, her phone buzzed with a message from Laurie. Coffee? My treat. There's more to talk about. Minutes later, they sat across from each other in a cozy corner of their favorite cafe, cups of coffee steaming gently between them. Laurie leaned in, her expression a mix of mischief and relief. You know, Di, there's something else you should know about the whole house drama. Diana, intrigued, set down her cup. What is it? Well, Laurie started, a twinkle in her eye, when Mum talked about having all those financial statements and legal threats. Diana's eyes widened. Yeah. It was mostly a bluff, Laurie confessed, a grin breaking across her face. Mum had some old tax returns and bank statements, but nothing like what she implied. She knew which buttons to push with Roy. She played the mum card hard. Diana laughed, the sound bubbling up from deep within her. You're kidding. So, Mrs. Helen was just? What, winging it? Pretty much, Laurie chuckled. She knew Roy still has a conscience somewhere in there. She just needed to nudge him to find it. Diana shook her head in disbelief, her heart swelling with affection for the formidable woman. That's incredible. Your mum is something else. She is, Laurie agreed. But it worked, didn't it? Roy needed a push, and she gave him just enough of a scare to make him think straight. The conversation shifted as they discussed the children and their relief at not having to move. But as they were about to leave, Diana paused, her expression turning serious. Laurie, I can't thank you and your mum enough. This was more than just about a house. It was about the kids' stability, their home. You both stood up for us when you didn't have to. Laurie reached across the table, squeezing Diana's hand. Of course we did. Your family, Diana. And no matter what's happened with Roy, that doesn't change. You and the kids will always be part of us." As they walked out of the cafe into the late afternoon light, Diana felt a profound sense of gratitude and a reinforced bond with Laurie and Missis Helen. It was not just the victory of keeping the house, but the deeper joy of knowing she had a family in them, one that extended beyond mere blood ties. Driving back home, Diana reflected on the unexpected journey of the past week. The revelation about Missis Helen's bluff made her smile, but it also made her think about the power of family and the lengths to which they would go to protect each other. Arriving home, she found her kids playing in the yard, their laughter ringing clear in the autumn air. Watching them, Diana knew that the fight had been worth it, not just for the bricks and mortar of their house, but for the safety and joy evident on their faces. The house would remain their sanctuary, a place of love and stability thanks to the unyielding spirit of the family that stood by her side. A few weeks had passed since the resolution of the house situation, and life had slowly begun to settle into its new normal. The vibrant leaves of fall coloured the world in fiery hues, reflecting the warmth Diana felt in her heart. Today she was hosting a small backyard barbecue to celebrate the family's unity and resilience. Laurie, Missis Helen, and even Roy, who had been more present lately, were all coming. As Diana set up the picnic table with autumn-themed decorations, her daughter, Emma, ran up, her face lit with excitement. "Mummy, is Aunt Laurie bringing her famous apple pie?" Diana laughed, tying a red and gold balloon to the back of a chair. "Yes, honey. She promised she wouldn't come without it." "And Uncle Roy? Is he really coming too?" Emma's tone was hopeful but cautious, a reminder of the recent tensions. "He is," Diana replied, reaching down to smooth back a lock of hair from her daughter's face. "He wants to spend more time with you and your brother. That's good, right?" Emma nodded, a small smile creeping onto her face. "I guess. I just want us to be like before." "I know, sweetie. We're getting there. One step at a time," Diana reassured her, her heart aching a little for the innocence lost but hopeful for healing. The sound of a car pulling up signaled the first arrival. It was Laurie, her arms laden with dishes and of course the anticipated apple pie. "Need a hand?" Diana called out, moving to help her. Laurie handed over the pie with a grin. "Wouldn't dare come without it. Emma would never forgive me." As they set the food down, Missis Helen arrived, her presence commanding as ever, but her eyes twinkling with warmth. "Looks like I've arrived just in time. Need help with anything else?" "Just your cheerful self," Mum Laurie quipped, hugging her mother. The atmosphere was light and full of chatter, a stark contrast to the tension-filled days not long ago. As Roy arrived, a hush momentarily fell over the group. He held a soccer ball under one arm, a peace offering to his children. "Hey, everyone," Roy greeted, his voice a bit uncertain. He looked directly at Diana. "I brought something for the kids. Thought we might kick it around a bit." Diana nodded, a genuine smile breaking through. "That sounds like a great idea, Roy." The afternoon passed with laughter and the sounds of a family rediscovering its connections. Roy played with his kids, his efforts awkward but sincere. Diana watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of forgiveness and cautious optimism. Later, as they gathered around the table laden with good food, Diana raised her glass for a toast to family. She began, her voice steady and clear, who stand by each other through thick and thin. "We may not choose where we come from, but we can choose what we become. Here's to healing, to forgiveness, and to a future where we support each other always." "Here," the group echoed, clinking glasses under the setting sun. Missis Helen leaned over to Diana, her voice soft but audible. "You've done well, Diana. Kept the family together. That's no small feat." Diana's eyes met hers, gratitude and respect mirrored between them. "Couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for believing in me." As the day faded into a cool evening, Diana felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had brought them to a place of deeper understanding and renewed bonds. This triumph of the heart was not just about winning a battle, but about weaving the delicate threads of family back together. Let us know in the comments how this story has inspired you, or share your own experiences of overcoming adversity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching stories like this one. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest uploads. Your journey through the complexities of the human heart starts now. Remember, your story isn't over yet. It's just a new chapter beginning. Stay strong, stay inspired.